Alright, so the question here is asking us for f inverse prime of 8, which we know f inverse prime of 8 is going to equal 1 over f prime of f inverse of 8. So the first thing that we have to find here is this f inverse of 8. But it doesn't give us f inverse of 8. But it gives us the information we need to know to find f inverse of 8 because it tells us f of 3 equals 8. So for f, 3 is your x and 8 is your y. So here, for the inverse, 8 is our x, which means 3 would be the y that would go with that, right? So like if we have this function, we plug in 3, it gives us 8. So we plug 8 into the inverse, it'll give us 3, because it takes us back to what we started with. So f inverse of 8 is 3. Because right here, this is a y, takes us back to that x. So for this problem, we have 1 over f prime of 3. Okay, questions on that part? So when you're looking for the inverse, look at the y's of the original function, and whatever x went with it, that is your inverse for those. So now we need f prime of 3, and look at here, they gave us f prime of 3 equals 5, so now all you have to do is 1 over, replace that with 5. So 1/5 is our answer. I think you are more likely to see this type of problem, or possibly one of the ones I'm getting ready to show you on the AP exam, than the ones where you actually have to like equations to deal with. And one of the reasons for that is some of those you can just find the inverse itself. Like that number 10 that we did, if we wanted, we could have just found the inverse, took its derivative, and plugged the number in, because we know how to find that inverse for that one. So I have seen more of these problems that are these sort of theoretical problems than actually having an equation with them. So I think you're more likely to see those. So here is another one. I'm going to let you try this one on your own. Okay, so for this you'll use the formula. First thing you got to find is f inverse of 2. What is f inverse of negative 2? What is f inverse of negative 2? It is 6. Very good. So we'll have 1 over f prime of 6. And then what is f prime of 6? It's 1/2. So we plug in our 1/2 here. Dividing fractions is easy as pie. Flip the second and multiply. We get 2 for our answer. Now, depending on how nice they are being on the AP exam, you might get one of these. I've seen them to look like this before. But that would only be if they decided, because, you know, as they create the AP exam, they create some questions that are really difficult and some that are much easier as far as difficulty goes. So if they decide for the inverse functions this year that they want to go easier, they're going to give you one of these. So if you know the formula and you know how to find the inverse of a number, then you'll be able to do the problem pretty easily. But if they want to be more confusing, they will give you something like this. They're going to give you lots of extra options. So they'll give you a table. Or they might list lots of f of 2 equals 8 sort of thing. That is 3 halves. So they tell us g of x equals the f inverse of x. Find g prime of 6. So in this case, we want to use our formula. We'll have 1 over, g is the inverse, so it's going to be f prime of g of 6. Or if we want to think of it this way, it's 1 over f prime of f inverse of 6. And a lot of times the AP questions will use this G notation or another letter, H or Z or whatever, because f inverse looks way too much like f prime, and this table tells us nothing about f inverse. Or not directly, anyway. So this does not give us f inverse. If they use that f inverse notation, you might be quick to think, well, this just gives you f inverse, but it doesn't. That's the derivative there. So the first thing we got to find is g of 6, or we can think of it this way: f inverse of 6. Anybody have any ideas for f inverse of 6? It is 2. Because right here, this would be like your f of x, that's like your y column, right? So here's your y, that y goes with this x right here. So our f inverse of 6 is 2. So now we've got, now we'll have 1 over f prime of 2. And so the table's also going to tell us what f prime of 2 is. What is f prime of 2? Right, here's your 2. F prime is 1/3. So we're going to have 1 over 1/3. And dividing fractions is easy as pie. Flip the second and multiply. And 3 is what we get for our answer. It's the same idea that we were doing the other night, except for the other night we had to plug in, like if we had to find f inverse of 6, we'd have to plug in 6 for our y and solve it. But in this case, we've got the table, so it's telling us here's your y, the x that goes with it is 2, so you don't have to solve anything from an equation. Okay, questions? Alrighty. Here, I think this is our, I got one more after this. Next one. Okay, so here we're finding G again is the inverse of F. We're finding G prime of 3. So we want G prime of 3 is going to be 1 over F prime of G of 3. Or we could think of that as 1 over F prime of F inverse of 3. So the first thing that we have to find is the G of 3. So, Liliana, what is G of 3 going to be, or the F inverse of 3? Perfect. So right here, this is your Y. The X that goes with it is 1. So we will have G prime of 3 equals 1 over F prime of 1. And what is F prime of 1, Liliana? It's 2. Very good. 1/2 is your answer. You'll notice once you pick a line, that's going to be the only line you use. The others are there sort of as distractors. They're kind of wanting you to say, well, they're wanting you to say here maybe that the G of 3 is 9, and then of course I'd run you into some trouble there, but they're wanting you to get those mixed up with some of the other values that they have there. Okay, questions? Okay, we're going to do one more. This one is more like what you had last night. So, F, we've got to find G of 0, G prime of 0, which means we've got to do 1 over F prime of G of 0. So the first thing that we've got to find is that G of 0, or that F inverse of 0. And this time we don't have a table, so we do actually have to solve this. So Destiny, what are we going to do with that 0? Good. We'll plug it into the function as our X or Y. That's our Y. So we'll have 0 equals X to the 3rd plus X minus 2. And this is one we'll have to use synthetic division, but the good thing is your coefficients are going to be 1, 0, 1, and negative 2. Can anybody tell me one right away that they know will work? 1 will work. And how do we know 1 will work? If we add all the coefficients and they equal 0, then 1 is going to work. So if we bring down 1, 1 times 1 is 1. It's 1. 1 times 1 is 1. It's 2. 2 here and 0 for that. So X equals 1 is our G of 0. So we'll have 1 over F prime of 1. And so we must find F prime of 1. Justice, what is F prime of X going to be? Perfect. And so then we have to find F prime of 1, which will be 3 times 1 squared plus 1. And when we do that, we will get 4. So we're going to get 1/4. That'll be our answer. So that one's just a little bit of a review because it's like last night. Is it I feel like on Friday it was probably pretty confusing. If you watch the video, it might seem confusing as well. I always feel like I make this a little bit confusing. I think the topic is kind of confusing to think of. Do you feel a little better about it after doing these problems? The practice of it is not that bad. Although remembering that formula months from now is kind of difficult, and remembering what to do. But the practice of it typically is not, these are not your like longest, hardest problems you will ever have. But I think the concept is kind of confusing. So hopefully this helps a little bit as far as being able to do problems like this. I'm going to go run to the copier real quick and get the copies, because your homework will be a worksheet. So